This episode of the CMO Suite is brought to you by Uconnect. Uconnect provides digital solutions and teams to brand CMOs, VPs, and marketers looking for true transparency in the biddable media space. From paid social and PPC to complex platforms like The Trade Desk, brands from across the world have connected to Uconnect. Visit them today at uconnect.com. And No Kid Hungry. We're proud to promote No Kid Hungry and their many initiatives to help kids in need of meals. No Kid Hungry helps kids be kids, not be hungry. Visit them at nokidhungry.org. And finally, we're proud that Season 3 of the CMO Suite is presented by the CMOcouncil.org as their official marketers podcast. The Chief Marketing Officer Council is the only global network of executives specifically dedicated to high-level knowledge exchange, thought leadership, and personal relationship building among senior corporate marketing leaders and brand decision makers. The CMO Council's 15,000 plus members control more than $550 billion in aggregated annual marketing expenditures and run complex distributed marketing and sales operations worldwide. For more information on membership, visit thecmocouncil.org. Let's start the show.
You're in the CMO Suite, the podcast for marketers who want to be in the know, presented by Connectivity Holdings.
All right, you are listening to the CMO Suite. I'm your host, Sean Halter. Remember that the CMO Suite is brought to you by Connectivity Holdings. We are incredibly excited to have as our guest today, Kevin Meyer. Kevin is the EVP, Chief Marketing Officer at BJ's Restaurant Incorporated. Kevin, thanks for coming into the show.
Thanks, Sean, for having me.
Listen, you're based out here in Los Angeles. We had a chance to talk just a tiny bit before the show started. We're out in Los Angeles. It's Los Angeles week for us. As many of you who listen to the podcast consistently know, we try to make a trip out west at least once a season. We've got some fantastic guests coming up this week. Kevin is first in with us. And Kevin, your background to me was pretty interesting because you're in the food space now.
I am. Restaurant business.
Yep. You're in the restaurant business. We love that restaurant, by the way. That Lisa, who's helping me to produce a little bit today, remind me what the name of that cookie thing is that they love.
Yeah,
it's a kazuki.
A Pazuki.
Pazuki.
How can you forget that?
I was dang close. I paid for it, but I may not always remember the name every time. So you're over at BJ's, and how long have you actually been there, Kevin?
I've been at BJ's about 5.5 years.
And so before that, though, were you predominantly in the automotive industry? Is that kind of where you cut your teeth to some extent?
Well, I started on the agency side. So I worked with Gray back in the day. I worked with Dentsu, Suzuki. But then I went client side in 1997. Spent time with Hyundai, spent time with Subaru, Volkswagen, Chevrolet, and
you made your way through
16
all of them.
years. Yeah.
So did you grow up here on the West Coast, or did you grow up out in the East Coast? Where'd you grow up?
So I grew up in Michigan, in Detroit, Michigan. I went to Purdue University, ended up my first job back in Detroit, and that's where I kind of got into the agency side. Ended up out here in 94, started working for Gray on the Mitsubishi business, and that's where I kind of got into the automotive side of things.
Did the fact that you grew up in Detroit have anything to do with that? Was there a passion for automotive because of that, or just happened to be that you grew up in Detroit, which is the home of automotive, and then you move out here and you end up?
So, my dad actually was a Ford factory worker. So, I mean, it was always in my blood, but I loved advertising. When I went to Purdue, I got into communications and advertising. I actually planned to be in mid-size agencies, and I just happened to come across some folks that I knew job to job that were with Gray and automotive, and that's just kind of how it happened.
And so the first job that you took on the agency side that you just talked about, that was here in Los Angeles?
No, that was in Detroit. It's actually for an agency called Mars Advertising way back when. It was actually a shopper agency. So I was with doing a lot of CPG, some entertainment back then. So yeah, I've been across a number of different categories.
How did you like the agency business back then?
It was great. I mean, truthfully, what was great, I think, back then is, and I think agencies still give the young folks this opportunity, but I got to do a little bit of everything. I got to learn the media side of the business. I got to learn account management, planning. And so I think a lot of that background as I went into the client side gave me at least the confidence to know a little bit about what kind of questions to ask. And really, I think the client side is more about leadership and managing people in the long run and selling ideas. But nonetheless, having that background allowed me to have, I think, great relationships with the agencies I worked with. And to some degree, I think, to be a strong leader in marketing or a CMO, you also have to understand how to inspire those agencies, give them the rope to kind of bring you great ideas, but at the same token, trying to keep it, what your brand needs and your company's looking for.
You said that your dad worked as a factory worker for Ford. So brothers and sisters at all?
I've got a younger sister. Yep.
And so did you ever go when he worked? Did you ever do did you ever see the factory? Did you ever walk the floor with him?
I did, absolutely. I worked at Rawsonville, Michigan and the Rouge.
And how was that?
Gosh, really
Hard?
interesting. Interesting, but also I think it also back when I was a kid, my dad was very clear, like, you're going to go to college and you're not going to do this. It's a hard job, in terms of the amount of time they spend on their feet. And you've got steel factories there. It's hot, it's dirty. And he's like, you're going to go to college and you're going to go do something different than this. So
Did your mom work at the same time, or was she a stay-at-home mom?
my mom did work. She sold Crystal at night. It's called Princess House back in the day.
Yeah.
She had a number of she was a kitchen designer at one point. So
You know,
myriad of jobs.
it's interesting. I have twin 16-year-olds who, by the way, just got their first car. They don't know what a recession is at 16, which is so odd for all of us to even think of, especially in our business, whether it's the ad business or whether you're, again, a CMO or a VP on the brand side. They've only kind of felt up. They were 5 or 6 kind of the last time we had a rough patch to some extent as a country. And so it does probably feel to them a bit like, I walked to school and, no shoes and snow up to my waist. But to know the fact that, my dad was a salesperson and he worked crazy hours. His father worked, insane hours.
Right.
You wonder if today's generation can, if the economy changes and if as we, navigate our way through some of those things that are bound to happen at some point, because it can't just go up forever.
Right.
Are they prepared for that to some
Yeah.
extent? I know as a parent, I try to ask myself that. Do you have kids yourself?
I do. I've got a 15-year-old daughter, freshman in
Okay.
high school. I've got a 10-year-old son, and I got to be honest with you, I'm a little over the top on those things in terms of that idea of entitlement and hard work. I'm really trying to instill those values because I think to your point, there's a generation. Half my team right now is under 25, 26 years old. And, I've got a pretty strong team, actually. They've got a great work ethic, but you do worry and you do see across the generation a little bit of entitlement, a little bit of people always looking for that next promotion year after year, when the reality is it takes hard work. And when things do go south, they're going to have to adapt. They're going to have to really appreciate what they do have and work for what they don't have. And I think, some of us who've been through those ups and downs have learned that through time. I don't think we necessarily had those skills as well, but we've learned it over time for sure.
And it's definitely a balance. We were talking just a little bit before we started that it's not getting easier. It's not slowing down
No.
this crazy marketing business. Everything is all digital and analyzed and overanalyzed to some extent. We were talking about that we had done one of our podcasts last year out of Denver with Alex Boguski. And that was, I think, one of the big takeaways for me with him was just the fact that, somebody like that who was a peer, certainly of or a mentor to some extent, when I kind of got in this business, to have somebody like him say that still at the end of the day, it's all still about people. And we have to remember that wherever we can.
I actually saw that podcast, and it is all about people.
Thank you. You're the one. Thank you very much. I'm just kidding.
It is about people. It's also, I think, tapping into that emotion that people have. I still believe that the best way to elevate a brand is to tap in that emotion of whatever your brand serves for them from a lifestyle perspective. I mean, going back to my experience at Subaru, instead of trying to be all things, all people, we actually celebrated the folks that loved our product. And that's where the love campaign came from. And to this day, they continue to run that formula very well, by the way. And, even in the restaurant business, we are a 208 restaurant company. We're a $1.2 billion business. We're public. And so there's a lot of pressure for us to continue to drive momentum. But in the end, people still go to restaurants, special casual dining, to indulge a bit, to celebrate, if you will. And we've got that atmosphere, that environment. And so we try to make sure that part of our strategy and part of what we deliver is when they've chose us to make sure that moment counts for them, whether it's a social moment, an occasion, a date night, whatever that. And so I think it all taps back to people for sure. But to your point, there is so much going on in the way we can reach those people. I'd love to talk about that today. That's just,
Sure.
It blows my mind in terms of the number of different touch points we have to weave together as marketers to make sure we do a good job of that.
We work with First Watch, which is a restaurant group. They do just breakfast and lunch, which is, again, just such an odd thing to me to some extent. Growing up, you're either open or you're closed. But to your point, you can create a space sometimes in there. And talking about, again, the fact that it's still about people. They've done an interesting job with Chef Shane and just talking about fresh food and some things like that. I don't think they really kind of cover into your category. I don't. Hopefully, you don't feel like that's a conflict to even just mention somebody else. But the space is an interesting space, and to your point, you still want people to feel like when they're coming in, whether it's you have 200 locations or 400 locations
Right.
or 20 locations, you still want to feel like it's not an overly chain type chain. You want to feel like the person that's there, and whether it's the seating hostess who seats you down, or the person who greets you at the door, or the person who comes out from the kitchen to make sure that your food was done right. You still want to have that local neighborhood feel to some extent.
Yeah, it's really important because restaurants are very local. If you think about it, we have 64 BJ's here in California, but there's 2 near me. So those are the 2 I go to, and that's what represents BJ's for me. But to your point, we work very closely with operations, and we have a great culture at our company to make sure operationally we try to deliver that experience. And what's kind of cool about our brand, by the way, is we're also a brew house. We've got 6 breweries. We make our own beer. We do like 40 R&D beers a year, of which maybe 3 hit the tables. And so there's this culture, I think, of real authenticity and approachability. And we try to maintain that experience within the 4 walls of the restaurant, and truthfully outside with delivery and things of that sort. That makes us a little bit more human than the average casual dining restaurant. And on top of it, I think because of our breadth of menu of 140 items, there's a little bit of something for everyone. So that helps us as well. It's not as niche as some of the fast casual might be.
As Lisa shakes her head, yes, because she's been there quite often. So how do you wrap your head around as a CMO for a group like that has, again, that number of locations, again, the importance of the person who actually finally sits you down. So obviously you're responsible for brand direction. You're responsible for making sure that people understand what the difference is between BJ's and competitors in the market. You're responsible for ensuring, to your point, that the message is received by consumers. And obviously, to some extent, whether it's yourself or your group or some of the outside agencies that you use, responsible for making sure that that message is conveyed in a way that consumers now can consume that business. How do you trickle that all the way down to making sure that then the person who's at the store level provides that same consistency of experience, or can you?
Look, we strive to. It's not always perfect. That's absolutely for sure. But I'll tell you, I've been there 5.5 years, but the company's had a culture for 20 plus years of trying to make that experience really matter. And our operations team is a large team, actually. And so we've got, VPOs, regional vice presidents. We've got DOs. We have folks. So we do a lot of training, to answer your question. I get to once a quarter meet with our operations team, explaining to them what we're trying to do. If there's a brand adjustment, we explain that. They have lots of training meetings around new products, around our brand, and that does trickle down to the restaurant. And our DOs spend a lot of time in the restaurants working with our general managers, our managers, and even our servers to kind of cultivate that character. And again, sometimes you do it better than others, but I think we do a pretty good job.
Is it extremely different than the time that you spend in the automotive industry, just because it is so personal? Obviously, again, whether it's a Toyota dealership or whatever it is, it does still go down to making sure that the salesperson who actually touches the person who comes in is providing that experience. But what are some of the biggest differences you feel like from your time in the automotive side to now being back into this kind of space?
Yeah. So it's funny. When I first started, people used to ask me that question. I said, well, it's very similar because you use the same approach. But now 5 years in, it's extremely different. And what I think is so different is the restaurant business, at least today, and the way we treat it on my team and our company culture, it's hand-to-hand combat. I mean, if you think about it, 80% of the people who are going to just decide on a restaurant today have no idea where they're going. One of the number one Google search terms is restaurants near me. So we have to be out there in the search space. We have to be out there. If people have been to our restaurant or know of us, we have to be able to target them properly. If they're in the restaurant, we have to provide them more information around our menu, both digitally as well as in the restaurant, and all the way through. I mean, even back to our loyalty program, how do you drive more frequency? So I call it hand-to-hand combat because we have all these little data moments we're trying to weave together. We're trying to influence our guests to create, a better opportunity for them to come in, but also report back on that and understand where we can do a better job on a daily basis. And by the way, I every morning wake up just like my boss does and our senior leadership team, and we look at their comp sales report. I mean, were we plus or minus? If we're minus, we're thinking about what other levers can we pull. Now, the auto business, to answer your question, was so much more carpet bombing, big dollars. I had $1 billion at Chevrolet. We did a lot of advertising. We launched, I think my first year at Chevy, I think we launched like 7 cars. We did 5 Super Bowl ads. So
you throw a lot out there and you see what sticks.
Right. And you kind of rely on the dealers to be that retail, and some dealers are better at it than others. Where here we own all of our restaurants, so we have to be both the retail and the brand side of it, which makes it very different and actually very fun.
And maybe, again, to some extent, some of the beauty of that in the digital space is the fact that you can look at comp sales reports to some extent, and you can figure out sometimes where the leaky bucket is.
Absolutely.
I feel like that's what it is with consumers a lot these days. It's not necessarily that they don't have brand loyalty. They do, but they're pulled in all different directions. You take now the fact that somebody, will bring your food directly to you and drop it off basically at your front door, and that upends the space certainly to some extent. You talked about CPG to some extent. Just think of how much that space is going to continue to change over the next 2 years, where people just, they're just not going to buy groceries, and they already aren't buying groceries the same way. And so how do you, when you were so focused on, shelf selection and being, top shelf or wherever it is on an end cap, to now have to figure out how do I get back in front of that consumer? It's certainly daunting. How do you find your way around that, or how do you continue to educate yourself to to try to use data as much as you can, but also not crush yourself underneath reams of paper?
Well, we do a lot of data. I think the other thing we do, just is we meet every morning as a senior leadership team. Excuse me, every Monday morning.
I was going to
for
say,
about
did I take
2.5
you away from there
hours.
today? Wow, I'm sorry.
And every Friday we meet for about 4 hours, and it's really to discuss the business, both locally, regionally, as well as nationally, to discuss those levers. But I guess more specifically to answer that question, casual dining's been down about 4% a year in traffic for 5+ years. Fast casual's eaten into that. The Whole Foods of the world have eaten into that. So you have to almost accept that. Say, okay, we are a different kind of occasion. We're an evolving occasion. People are going out a little bit more to indulge, like I said, maybe to celebrate. How can we make sure that from a share perspective, we're stealing share in that front? And that's where, again, we kind of go back to the authenticity of our brand. We think we've got a unique experience. I always say, you can go out with your wife and your kids at BJ's on a Friday night and actually almost feel like you're on a date night because the kids have the Pizookie and they're happy. You've got your wine and beer.
You squeeze the Pizookie back in.
And there's great food. Yep. You have to.
Squeezed it in, yeah.
And I do think the atmosphere is very different within our space. We're almost like premium casual in some way, that there's just a great experience. And people spend a lot of time in our restaurant on Friday night, we like, which is great. So I think that's just how we look at it.
The food's, I don't want to sound cliche, the food's good as well, though. I mean, it's easy to say that. You hope that every restaurant worth its salt has good food, but we've been often, and I don't know that I've ever had a bad experience there, and that's bound to just happen just through sheer number of trips and times. But the food is good. It seems fair priced in today's certainly economy. Does it change for you from market to market? Is it consistent? Is the menu consistent from market to market?
The menu is relatively consistent, but the mix is very different regionally.
From like an LTO standpoint, do you do limited time offers, or what do you guys?
We do LTOs. We do a number of LTOs. Those tend to be mostly national unless we're testing things. But to give you an example, we're still known for our deep dish pizza in California. On the East Coast, we're much more about our loaded burgers. We also have enlightened entrees, which are about 450 calories, about 750 calories. And those do very well for us. About every 100 checks, we see about 30 items ordered there. So that's obviously a trend we need to keep in front of.
Yeah.
Everything from the keto diet to gluten-free. We're actually strong gluten-free. But thank you for your comment on the quality food. I mean, we actually do a lot of ham prep up front. It's a big part of our business, and we take a lot of the pride in the food we deliver.
Well, and you can tell that sometimes. Again, sometimes, to your point, you don't necessarily know where you're going to eat at night. You might pick a place and you pick it fast, or you pick it because it's close, or you pick it because of all these different reasons that all of us in the space are always trying to figure out exactly why that is. But clearly, you guys are investing in the back of house piece of that certainly as well. As you've made your way through there, how long have you been there now? Is it 5 years?
Yeah, 5 years.
So what's not necessarily what's next for you with them, but what's next for you from your perspective, as far as how do we stay in front of these consumers? How do we take the data and the reams of data that we have and the meetings that you guys have to be able to kind of kick through that, but still evolve, or still ensure that you're staying in front of them, but they don't just become a number on a sheet?
Yeah, I mean, that's a pretty good question. I think the first thing I go to is trying to find new revenue channels or occasions. So, we invested heavily in delivery, probably in front of most of our competitors last year, and that was a big part of we had a record year last year, so it was a big part of our year in terms of growth. Thank you. We were way ahead of the category. Catering's a big move for us. We're not like your corner bakery kind of place, but we think because of the breadth of our food, we're a great occasion for catering, so we're investing in that. We're looking at things like, should we have a beer club? We've got this great beer, very specialty beers. We've got an amazing brewer who's one of the godfathers of craft brewing. He's been doing this for 20 plus years for us alone. He's got a great team too. But
and so the thought is maybe, again, to build something around either him or just the fact that it's such a great beer. People forget that part sometimes. They know that you're a brewery, but they just forget. I think they do. The personalized nature of it.
I spent some time with our one of our R&D brewers out in Boulder, Colorado this year, and one of his, I won't call it frustration, but like missed opportunities is like people still don't believe we make our own beer. We've got 6 breweries and we do so much there. So my team has been working over the last 12 months to help us do more of that. So we're building out our website better. We're going to do brewer dossiers, and we're going to reinvigorate the blog and just try to recapture that, because there's very few brands that can do that because of the tide laws. We've been able to over time build that out because we've got breweries in Texas and California, and so that's a real advantage for us.
Well, it gives you, again, an opportunity to create unique content, and I think if there's nothing I've talked about more this season, or that the CMOs and VPs that we've talked to, it's that's really what consumers want anymore. They don't want to be sold to. Yes, you definitely still need advertising. Yes, you definitely still need to stay in front of them in their cars, running radio or billboards, so that you can continue to build that brand. But where you can wrap some unique content, it is that separator for you guys. It is a chance for you to be able to say, look, we have these breweries. This is made here. This is made with love. And,
right.
and that's woven into the fabric of your brand. And there aren't, a ton of your competitors that can tell that same story. And so if that's that unique selling proposition for you guys, it'd be awesome to hear, more of that. I think we've heard some of your radio out in the marketplace, maybe more recently. How involved are you in that process, in the selection of the actual media that delivers this content as you develop it?
I'm involved in everything. We're a team of 15 people. We're still relatively thin. We've got 10 great agency partners. We've got, subject matter experts that we work with. But we're always looking at evolving the media mix based on what's going on. Sometimes we're a little more national, sometimes we're a little more local. And I think I spent a lot of time too in the digital world. Right now, the big move that I've seen is this geospatial thing. Google will now tell you when you search for something, when the last time you were at that place, right? That's kind of crazy. You've got the Wazes of the world. I think, the Radius 8s, you can actually use your website to be very personalized and localized. So we're investing a lot in that. So I'm spending a lot of time more in the digital space, but I also stay very close to the media side of things.
It is interesting to see how automotive and your space are going to continue to kind of meld together. I drive a Tesla. They just pushed out an update maybe a month ago, and it's got, are you hungry? Literally at the top. And you click on it, it's going to pull up 4 or 5 restaurants that are close to you. And the crazy part is that it will literally almost drive you straight to it, which is kind of interesting to see those worlds collide. Did you ever think you'd see that in your lifetime? No,
not to this degree. I mean, it was the Big Brother thing we talked about, 15 years ago. I won't call it Big Brother because I don't think it's being used in a way that's really maybe it has, but based on some examples.
It is weird, yeah.
But I personally, I opt into a lot of things because to me, the brands I'm engaged with, it provides me a convenience and a benefit. So I'm not as opposed to some of those things in terms of that data helping me have less friction as a consumer.
It's certainly more direct. What do you wish you knew more about?
Ooh, that's a great question. I'd say it's hard to do a great job as a CMO, stay on top of all these things, drive the business, link, cross-functionally across the company, and stay in front of marketing trends. And so, one of the things that I've made a commitment to myself for the next 12 to 24 months is just getting out more and seeing what's going on out there, especially, in these digital opportunities. I think that's the tough part, is just doing a great job. And also, I won't call it networking, but just learning more. And so I think that's one of the challenges as a CMO. If you're, I think there's some companies where you have more leeway that way. Ours is a day-to-day hand-to-hand combat business. And so I've got to be there. And so it's a little bit difficult.
It does sound as if you have to be pretty stealthy, and that's not unusual for the industry that you're in. Again, I'm sure at your time when you're over on the automotive side, you had teams upon teams that could allow you some of that ability. And there's nothing wrong with having a lean team to make sure that you're operating as direct or as close to that consumer point as you can. But to your point, sometimes getting out in the space, if that doesn't help you to understand what's happening with the consumer more than your last trend in the programmatic space.
Yeah.
I don't know what is to some extent.
I think the other thing too is just sorry to interrupt, is
no,
just
you're fine.
Get out in front of our consumers. So we're going to invest heavily in more data from our guests. Focus groups, qualitative, quant, et cetera. I think you have to do that as often as possible because you learn so much. And even get under our restaurants. It's tough to get out into our restaurants on the East Coast for me. To get down south, I've got to make a commitment to that as well, because every time I do, I learn more and gives us more ideas. So I think that's, again, part of the challenge is find the time to do all those things and be a dad.
And be a dad. Balance all of that out.
Right.
Listen, we've got a couple more minutes left. We really appreciate you being on the show. What's one really great piece of advice you feel like somebody gave you along this path, along this journey? I mean, I have no idea exactly how old you are. I'm going to guess your club age is around 39, which is, where mine is.
I think I'm your age, yeah.
We're pretty close probably. But, when you think about it, again, it's been a journey. And so, from that standpoint, has there been a piece of advice that you feel like you always go back to, Kevin, when you're stuck? Maybe something from your dad or from somebody along the way?
I think I spent a lot of time mentoring my team, and I've got some real superstars that are way above their years in terms of their experience and the way they think. And I always encourage them is to never rest on your laurels, to work hard, to continue to learn. Don't be entitled. Don't expect that next promotion. Earn that next promotion. And what I always tell them is the way you earn that is to basically do the job above you. accept as much as you can. Yes, you may make mistakes, but continue to take those things on. It may even shake your confidence at times, but take those risks, and over time, those people I think always develop and grow. And I think breadth too is important. Don't specialize yourself. Take on other. I've got a menu team. I've got somebody in the menu team who we just put in the advertising team, and just to learn more and more. I think that's really important.
And so the advice that you would give to them again is not necessarily put yourself in just one spot. And then has there been anybody who's given either that same advice to you or advice from somebody that you feel like you've taken along the way?
Yeah, so I had two amazing mentors. I'll give you their names. Tim Mahoney, who was my CMO at Subaru, and then I worked with him at Volkswagen, and he ended up going to Chevy Global. And then Dave Weber, who was my boss at Hyundai back in the America's Best Warranties days. I think I learned two different things. Tim was a brand guy, brand first and foremost, in consumers, and I've always, I think, lived by that, and he instilled so much in me. And then Dave on the other side was a car guy. And he was all about, weaving the organization together, staying in front of the dealers, and making sure we thought about the day-to-day sales. I think I've taken both those together, and it's kind of who I've become, is a little bit of that balance of brand, but also making sure there's performance involved in how we do things. And those are the two guys that really inspired me throughout my career.
Are your parents still alive?
They are.
And so how has your dad how's your dad taken that journey? Obviously, as you went through automotive, that must have been interesting for him. And now as you've kind of come into this other space, how is it for him to be able to see that you actually took some of his early advice?
Yeah.
You didn't end up on a factory floor, and there's nothing actually wrong with many people that earn their living that way.
No, God bless them.
But how is that when you get a chance to kind of see them and show them what you've done?
Well, they're proud, and I think, I took their work ethic with me. They both worked really hard and continue to. They're very active. It was just funny when I was at Chevy in the global marketing team with Joel Iwanek, and I left that job for a number of reasons. I think he was disappointed. I was back in Detroit. My family was there. I was, it was a pretty big job in the auto business. And I think he's like, well, why are you leaving that, man? This is so great. But for me, it wasn't exactly what I was, who I was. It was a little too,
That's what it was.
It's General Motors. Yeah. And, but I think he's always been proud of the moves I've made. And I think he appreciates the work I put into it.
Well, listen, I appreciate you making some time for us. It's Kevin Mayer, EVP, Chief Marketing Officer at BJ's Restaurants Incorporated. That went fast, didn't it?
It did.
Thank you so much for coming in today. I know you were feeling a little bit under the weather. We made you drive all the way over to Burbank. In Los Angeles, driving anywhere is a bit of a pain. But I really enjoyed having you on the show. Appreciate you listening to the podcast and certainly providing some positive feedback on that as well. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk to you a little bit more and maybe provide a follow-up with you in the near future.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Take us out of the show. Thanks, Kev.
Thanks for hanging out in the CMO Suite, the podcast for marketers who want to be in the know, presented by Connectivity Holdings.
You're a C-level manager. You shouldn't have to know the difference between behavioral or contextual targeting, but your agency should. Uconnect provides brands and biddable teams direct access to platforms like The Trade Desk, Google, Amazon, Facebook, OTT, and more. Their US-based traders can train your in-house team or provide complete transparency with no minimums and CPM-based service pricing for true transparency. Something Mighty Hive, The Trade Desk, and Centro simply don't offer. Tired of being the smartest one in the room? Reach out to Uconnect today for a free demo. Uconnect, the world's leader in true transparent biddable media.